Welcome to War News Channel. Dear friends, the U.S. House of Representatives has just passed a law allowing the confiscation of Russian money deposited in U.S. banks, while urging the European Union to do the same. Only $6 billion of Russian money is in the U.S. The remaining more than $200 billion lies in European banks. Thus, the U.S. has broken international law allowing the robbery of other countries' assets, which means that the reputation of U.S. banks will no longer exist. So many countries with deposits in the U.S. will be afraid. So there will be an intention to withdraw their money back home, especially China and Saudi Arabia. These are the two countries that send the most money and have also been threatened by the U.S. many times. That makes the U.S. government's $30,000 billion public debt even more difficult to repay when the U.S. Federal Reserve is determined not to raise interest rates. Importantly, business investment in the U.S. is no longer attractive because it is not safe. Russia will retaliate by confiscating U.S. assets on Russian soil, with a provisional value of about $60 billion. The European Union strongly opposes the decision of the U.S. Congress, because Russia's money is mainly on EU soil. So if the U.S. loses credibility once, the EU will lose credibility up to 10 times. Furthermore, there is a lot of European money deposited in the U.S., which also creates a bad precedent if the U.S. does the same thing when Europe refuses to obey. G7 finance chiefs and EU officials continue to express concerns that the move would violate international law, making investors distrust the euro. At the same time, there is concern that it will become a legal precedent for the US to confiscate the assets of EU countries if they do not listen to the US. EU officials are also concerned that it could lead to an economic war with Russia, in which retaliation from Russia would mainly target EU countries, not the US, because Russian assets are mainly blocked in Europe, not in the US. Previously, asset confiscation only took place after the war ended, not while the war was ongoing. Specifically, the confiscation of Iraqi assets took place after the end of the Gulf War. Confiscation of German assets carried out after the end of World War II. Even in the US, leading experts on public debt have emphasized that the IEA International Emergency Economic Powers Act does not allow the confiscation of all of Moscow's frozen assets in the absence of conflict. Real arms between America and Russia. Bloomberg quotes former International Monetary Fund, IMF, official Ishwar Prasad, saying that weaponizing the dollar through the seizure of frozen Russian assets could prompt a move away with the greenback on a global scale. This news agency also said that it is unlikely that the US will confiscate Russian assets without the consent of other G7 countries and the EU. Instead, the EU is considering the option of using profits from Russia's frozen assets to aid Ukraine, or used as collateral to secure loans to Ukraine. EU leaders have in principle agreed to appropriate most of the profits from Russia's frozen assets to transfer to Ukraine. Mrs. Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission (EC), said that this plan could bring in more than $3 billion per year and Ukraine will receive the first $1 billion around July 2024. According to the Commission's proposal, European Commission, 90% of the proceeds will go to Ukraine's military aid fund. The remaining 10% will support the country in other ways. JP Morgan analyst Catherine Lay was quoted as saying that China could accelerate de-dollarization. According to JP Morgan estimates, about 70% of China's international trade is still denominated in USD. Paula Sabacci, author of The Cost of Free Money, told Bloomberg, countries that use the USD for international trade and finance need to be sure that their assets will not be confiscated according to the wishes of the United States. Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov warned that Russia could downgrade diplomatic relations with the US if the US appropriated Russia's frozen funds. Moscow has repeatedly said that the confiscation of the country's assets is tantamount to theft. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Sergeyevich Peskov warned that the United States will damage its own economy as well as the global financial system if it carries out its threat to expropriate Russian assets and transfer them to Russia. Ukraine. According to Mr. Dmitry Sergeyevich Peskov, this is no different from breaking all the foundations of the global economic system. In response to the U.S. confiscation of assets, Russia also ordered the confiscation of $440 million from J.P. Morgan Chase Bank, the largest in the U.S. Ukraine is happy to receive U.S. aid, but not all of this money goes to Ukraine. Because in the aid package for Ukraine, about $23 billion will be used by the U.S. to replenish its weapons stockpile to create conditions for continuing to transfer weapons to Ukraine. $14 billion for the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative, allowing the Pentagon to directly purchase weapons from American contractors and deliver them to Ukraine. $11 billion will be available to fund current U.S. military operations in the region. Approximately $8 billion in non-military assistance to help the Ukrainian government maintain basic operations such as paying salaries and pensions. That is, pump emergency oxygen to the Kyiv regime, otherwise it will immediately stop breathing. So it's $61 billion when America uses $23 billion to buy goods for itself. $14 billion of our purchases are sent to Ukraine. Another $11 billion to the U.S. to feed American soldiers. $8 billion for Ukraine to pay salaries. The bitter thing for Ukraine is that the donated weapons are not completely new weapons, but in fact the U.S. military advances by exporting weapons that have been in stock for a long time and are about to expire to Ukraine at a much higher cost. Times the market price. More specifically, the resolution of the U.S. House of Representatives clearly states that it is a loan, not free aid. If you borrow, you have to repay the debt. Ukraine's international debt was already more than $200 billion, and with this, Ukraine probably won't be able to repay all the debt for the rest of its generations. All of Ukraine's assets in 2023 have been pawned by Zelensky to 4 American agricultural and mineral corporations through BlackRock. BlackRock is a global investment group founded in 1988 and headquartered in New York. Is the world's largest mortgage asset manager with initial assets of $6.84 billion in June 2019. After the financial and monetary storm, many countries declared bankruptcy, so they had to bring their assets mortgaged land in BlackRock. BlackRock operates globally with 70 offices in 30 countries and customers in 100 countries. That's why BlackRock is like the world's largest pawn shop run by billionaire Larry Fink. In fiscal 2017, BlackRock reported profits of $4.970 billion, with annual revenue of $12.491 billion, up 12% from the previous fiscal cycle. BlackRock's shares trade at more than $414 per share, and its market capitalization was valued at more than $61.7 billion in October 2018. As of 2018, BlackRock ranked 237th in Fortune 500 list of the largest United States corporations by revenue. Currently, BlackRock is pledging assets of up to $11,000 billion through the Aladdin risk management platform, of which BlackRock owns 7% of global stocks and bonds, owning most of the shares. All of the largest companies in the U.S. and has close business relationships with members of the U.S. Senate and House of Representatives. The U.S. government has long used BlackRock to lead Europe by the nose and then force it to plow to create wealth. Zelensky has been bullied since he first came to power, and is now tame and obedient. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Egypt are trying to remove their nose rings to freely eat grass. As for Russia and China, the U.S. tried to reach out, but it didn't work. Faced with the act of stealing U.S. assets, Vice Chairman of the Russian Security Council Dmitry Anatolyevich Medvedev said on April 27 that Russia will not be able to respond adequately to the U.S. confiscation of Russian assets. However, This does not mean that Russia's response will be any less painful. The reason is obvious. We do not hold a significant amount of U.S. state assets, so our response cannot be proportionate, which means we could confiscate assets, for example, by order of courts over property of individuals subject to Russian jurisdiction. Mr. Anatolyevich Medvedev mentioned movable assets in real estate of Americans in Russian territory as well as property investments and other savings of American citizens. Mr. Anatolyevich Medvedev proposed enacting a law allowing Russia to confiscate the assets of citizens from unfriendly countries. After Russia launched a special military operation in Ukraine in February 2022, the U.S. and its allies banned transactions with the Central Bank and the Ministry of Finance of Russia. At the same time, about $300 billion of Russian assets in the West were blocked, mostly in Europe. Most of these assets are bonds and deposits denominated in euros, US dollars, and British pounds. Top U.S. officials want to seize Russian assets, while some European bankers and officials worry that asset seizures would set a dangerous precedent. Do you think the Europeans will follow in the footsteps of the U.S. in confiscating or, to put it bluntly, robbing Russia's assets? If that happens, how will Russia retaliate? Please leave a comment below. Today's program will be paused. If you find it interesting, please subscribe, share and ring the bell to receive the latest notifications. Hello and see you again. You in the next programs.